This is Peter Helen on the show Israel with Dr. E. Michael Jones. Mike was just on the show Citizens for Community Media, and we're discussing the issue with Cardinal McCarrick, and the situation now has arisen about Pennsylvania, the priest accusations, and now I think it's possibly turning to the issues on the other show, only because from the far distance we see the possibility of Israel a factor in that if the moral authority of the church, the voice can be weakened, that enables the regime to justify possibly another situation or war, in fact, with Iran. That's way off in the distance, but that's the only reason that we're seeing
that's a good point. We're talking about the Pennsylvania grand jury releasing its report. 300 priests investigated, 2 indictments handed down. This is you may be right, because in the run-up to the Iraq War in 2003, what you saw was all of the commissars who were there to keep the Catholic Church on the reservation. I'm talking about Rod Dreher, who was writing for National Review at that time. He was a Catholic at that point. He's now going on to be something else, okay? But his job as the commissar at National Review was to take out the Catholic Church in the run-up to the war in Iraq. And the way he did it was basically saying, nobody has to listen to Pope John Paul II. No Catholic has to listen to him, because he didn't do anything about the abuse crisis in the Catholic Church. So what you're seeing here is the bigger picture. The abuse crisis is psychological warfare. Let's get this straight from the very beginning. That's what it was in the run-up to the war in Iraq. I hope we're not in a run-up to a war with Iran, but what you said probably makes sense. What we have here is now the abuse crisis coming to South Bend, Indiana. Okay, we have a newspaper here that has basically descended to the point of being an extended obituary section surrounding USA Today, which comes to free for the people here. Now jumping on the bandwagon of what is, we would have to say, a moral panic. Okay, this is the latest moral panic. Pretty much 1 year ago today, right around this time, we were heading into the Harvey Weinstein moral panic. Periodically, the news media will unleash these events and try to get them to snowball and try and drive more and more people to become involved in this whole thing. Moral panic is a psychological term, also a sociological term. When people get swept up in an event and sort of lose all contact with reality. The Salem witch trials, a historical version of the moral panic. I don't know whether people remember the daycare crisis of the 1990s, where there were satanic cults tunneling under daycare centers, abusing children. We have this meme of child abuse, okay, which gets trotted out periodically as a way of punishing people. Okay, and now it's been trotted out to punish the Catholic Church. Now, just a week ago, we talked about the Cardinal McCarrick case. Cardinal McCarrick case, anyone who read even the New York Times description of it understood that it was clearly a case of adult homosexuality. Okay, McCarrick abused his position as a bishop to basically entice seminarians to sleep with him. This is, by definition, adult homosexuality. Now, if they portray it as it really is, which you had to find out by reading between the lines, then the question intrudes that we raised last week. Okay, well, is it wrong? Is homosexuality wrong? If it's not wrong, if it is wrong, then why aren't we talking about, as we said last week, the mayor of South Bend, who got married here during Gay Pride Week, supposedly married a man during Gay Pride Week? If it's wrong, why are we criticizing him? If it's not wrong, why are we criticizing Cardinal McCarrick?
But that was an issue that you had back when your son was at Harvard, and Harvard is, you know, the leading educational citadel of the country, and this was Peter Gomes, who wrote the good book, trying to justify a reading of Scripture that says homosexuality is fine.
Yes.
And our mayor went to Harvard, so they're really, and he goes to a church that says it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that was 1992. My son was part of a group that was founded a magazine called Peninsula Magazine. It was the time of alternative magazines. Conservative think tanks were funding them on campuses. And they published an article called Smashing the Pink Triangle. So it had the pink triangle smashed into bits. And it was criticizing the promotion of homosexuality on Harvard's campus. Well, Gomes, out of the blue, announces that he's a homosexual. Nobody mentioned his name. It was a classic instance of where the guilty flee where none pursueth. Okay? He announced this, and he immediately became a cultural hero because the oligarchs want to promote homosexuality. It's clear. They're promoting this back then. That's 25 years ago. They were promoting it back then at elite institutions like Harvard, and they're promoting it now.
And they promote it, especially they want to get into the theological departments.
Well, so this guy
reinterpret Scripture.
This man is Christian minister at Harvard. So as soon as he comes out of the closet, he gets a big book contract, six-figure book contract, to write a book justifying sodomy from the Bible. Well, good luck. Good luck. You've taken on a really monumental task that is doomed to failure. You can't do it. It's impossible, but that doesn't mean that he didn't write a book. But I'm saying that this has been the program for all along. Now, as we said last week, there is a conflict here. Okay, if they portray the situation, the problem in the church where there is a problem of homosexual clergy, then they condemn their own program. So they have to change this. They have to judo this thing and make it look as if it's pedophilia.
Right, and it looked like you were wrong from last week's talk because the reports on Pennsylvania, it's all children, they say. So
right.
So you were saying that it was very few are children, and that report was saying it's almost all children.
Yeah. Well, look, they tried to portray the McCarrick thing as children too. But they tried to. Their story was a 15-year-old. Well, a 15-year-old is not pedophilia. He's mature sexually, so that's not pedophilia. There's a statute that says if you're 2 minutes under the age of 18, it's a crime, but that's a legal fiction. Okay, so it wasn't even the instance they gave wasn't that. But we have a completely different issue here. This is a completely different issue than what we talked about the last time, because we're talking about the grand jury. The grand jury is a legal instrument. Okay, the grand jury is an investigation. It investigates certain people and sees if there is enough evidence to bring an indictment. In other words, to indict these people and bring them to trial. So what we had here was, as I mentioned, an investigation of 300 priests who had been accused. Now, as I said, they came up with 2 indictments. Okay, now it seems to me if you have a grand jury, okay, take those 2 indictments and proceed to trial and see if the accusations hold up and see if the man is guilty. Because as we know in the law, you're innocent until proven guilty. Okay? But they forgot to tell us that doesn't apply to Catholic priests. Catholic priests are guilty until proven innocent. And the proof of this is this grand jury investigation. So what do you have here? By their own admission, they've got 2 priests out of 300 that have enough evidence to proceed to a trial. That means there are 298 priests who they couldn't find enough evidence to try them. Now, okay, if you look into this, you find out a lot of these people are dead. Why are we bringing up files on dead people? You can't try a dead person. Okay, there are some instances where the statute of limitations has run out. Okay, that's true, but we're dealing with legal issues here. This is the law. The law has to follow certain procedures, and the statute of limitations is one of those procedures. So what we should have had is basically this man in Harrisburg announcing in the court that there are going to be 2 indictments, and then the legal proceedings go ahead. Okay, well, we didn't have that at all. Why? Let me put it this way. Why, if you did not find the evidence in 298 of these cases persuasive enough to go to trial, why should we accept it? Why should we accept the evidence that you yourself rejected? But no one is asking this question. So what happens is you flood the media with all sorts of lurid details. You have the authority of the state here behind these the release of these documents, and everybody thinks they're true. Well, wait a minute. They're not true until they're proven true in court.
But in England, I know, reading their laws, slander or destroying somebody's reputation, they seem to like take back to court real quick. You're slandering my reputation, I'm taking you to court. We don't seem to have laws that
no,
are strong enough.
It's much easier. It's much easier. There's basically no downside to attacking someone. No downside. It's much easier to get a slander judgment in England than it is here. Okay, but we can't. We're talking about an institution that we're attacking here, and I think the point here is that the church, and I'm trying to say the local church, is misreading this. They have a fundamental misreading of what's going on. So this is the South Bend Tribune account of last Saturday, and this is Bishop Rhodes. If the Pennsylvania grand jury report taught us anything, Rhodes said, it's that victims deserve to see the names of their abusers made public for all to see. What are we talking about here? Who said there's a right to do this? What? First of all, you're talking about people who have been accused. You're going to make public all of the names of people who have been accused, but they're not going to go to trial. That means they have no ability to clear their name in public. So you are condemning them, you are destroying their characters simply by publishing the report. Now, why is the bishop going along with this? Why is the church going along with this? I don't understand this. This is psychological warfare against the church. The very proceedings, the way they're going along, is a form of warfare against the church. And it's not the first time either. What we're seeing in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, is simply a repeat of what happened in Philadelphia. Okay? In Philadelphia, we have the same type of situation. We have a district attorney who announces at some time around the year 2000 that she is going to investigate all of the institutions in the city of Philadelphia to ferret out instances of child abuse. Okay, that's what she said. It turns out that's not true. There's only one institution that got examined, and it was the Catholic Church. Okay, so she then spent the same type of situation. This is Lynn Abraham, who is on the board of the ADL, by the way, who launches this investigation, spends years investigating, looking into these files, spends millions of dollars, and she comes up with 0 indictments. So this is even better than the Harrisburg investigation. 0 indictments. And in the rage that came about because she got no indictments, she releases all of the files, and we have exactly the same situation. All of these priests are now going to be tried in public, tried in the press, because the DA didn't find any evidence to bring them to trial. Now, this is outrageous. What does this have to do with what Rhodes just said? Nothing. Nothing. This is an attack on the church, pure and simple. Okay? And so what you created in Philadelphia was a moral panic. Okay? And the moral panic created a witch hunt. And every Catholic priest was considered guilty until proven innocent. So what happened here, it gets worse. It gets much worse. Okay? Here in Philadelphia, Lynn Abram retires, and she's replaced by a black Catholic prosecutor by the name of Seth Williams. Seth Williams takes a case that Lynn Abraham started. He goes to one of the prisons in Philadelphia. He finds a heroin addict in the prison. And the heroin addict is now claiming that he was sexually abused by a priest. Now, this is your ticket out of jail.
They do it all the time.
In Philadelphia. This is your ticket out of jail because now we have a new prosecutor and he wants to make a name for himself. And so he's going to succeed where Lynn Abraham failed. We're going to nail this guy. Okay? So they indict two priests. Now, this guy is completely lacks any credibility whatsoever as a witness. Okay? It turns out that the priest, they know that the case is going to fail. This is a priest is offered a plea bargain. Okay, just plead guilty and you'll get community service. The priest, we found this out later because the superior of his order, the Salesians, told everyone this. The priest refuses the plea bargain. He ends up being thrown in jail, goes to prison. While in prison, they deny him his medication. This is a man in his 60s, a priest in his 60s, and he dies. This is a man who dies in prison because, and then it comes out that the case just falls apart. The guy made it up to get out of prison. Surprise, surprise. But the priest who had to suffer because of this, he's dead. Now, and just to add the end of this story, Seth Williams is now in jail. The prosecutor is in jail because he was corrupt as the day is long. He was taking bribes, and now he's in jail. So why isn't this part of the story here? This is the type of outcome that you have from these moral panics. All of those priests were falsely. All of those priests were slandered. The church was slandered simply by the fact that the jury released that information with no ability to take it to trial. No ability, and the priests had no ability to clear their names.
Now, reading some of the comments, they were strong comments against the attorney general who was prosecuting a guy named Shapiro, saying this guy hates the church. I mean, these are comments.
Yeah.
So, do you think there is an actual hatred going on?
Yeah, I think we're talking about the traditional enemies of the Catholic Church. These are two Jews. Okay, the Jews are the traditional enemies of the Catholic Church.
But you're not allowed to say that they're prejudiced.
No, they
can say everybody else.
They have no axe to grind whatsoever. Okay, we're not allowed to talk about this at all. Okay, but the simple fact of the matter is, it's not just Lynn Abraham. Was on one of the official major Jewish organizations here. So she represents their interests by being on that organization. And she had other instances where she's going after the stories I did on Grays Ferry, that neighborhood. That neighborhood was the traditional Irish neighborhood, and it was doomed to extinction because these people wanted them out. The property was too valuable, so it was an example of ethnic cleansing in action. So these are people who are enemies of the Catholic Church. Now, if you try and bring this up, you get nowhere. Okay, so here's the story, the whole story of trying to explain Lynn Abraham's motivation in this story. A lady by the name of Carol Johnston wrote a letter to the Philadelphia Inquirer, September 29th, 2005. Okay, in which she tried to explain Abraham's motivation in this whole thing. This is what she wrote. She says, I think it's legitimate to raise the question of District Attorney Lynn Abraham's general background. The District Attorney is a member of the Anti-Defamation League, which issued in 2002 a press release denouncing the remarks of a Cardinal Rodriguez, who had been discussing the situation in the Middle East and the sufferings of the Palestinian people. Miss Abraham has been a Philadelphia district attorney for nearly 40 years, and certainly during that time, she must have known of sexual abuse cases occurring in the Catholic Church. But why in 2002 was she moved to convene a grand jury to investigate such cases? Does her action have anything to do with the Church's expressed reservations about the political direction taken by the State of Israel? Perhaps we will never know, but I do think the view of a Jewish district attorney's investigation against the Catholic Church ought to be in turn investigated from the point of view of possible bias. But add to this district attorney's imprisonment of 11 Christians who were peaceably demonstrating in Philadelphia last year. Add to this her known bias in favor of Planned Parenthood, and to this again her known strongly held views on the death penalty, which has earned her from the black community the moniker Queen of Death. Then questions of prosecutorial abuse and prejudice do indeed become legitimate to raise. So, guess when that letter ran in the Philadelphia Inquirer?
2000.
It never ran. They refused to run it because you're not allowed to bring up this type of information. You're simply not allowed to bring it. Now, again, to get back to the initial why now question, Rod Dreher, as I said, was there as the commissar to keep the Catholics on the conservative reservation by attacking Pope John Paul II in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq. Okay? Rod Dreher left National Review and went to the Dallas Morning News. What did he do with the Dallas Morning News? He orchestrated a hit piece on Cardinal Rodriguez. That was supposed to be the big scandal. It went nowhere. It got nowhere whatsoever. Again, we're talking about political motivation here. Cardinal Rodriguez was public enemy number one among the Jews after Cardinal Ratzinger or Pope Benedict resigned because they were afraid that some South American like Cardinal Rodriguez was going to be elected Pope. And so they pulled out all the stops to blacken his name. Okay? This is the type of motivation that's going on behind the scenes. This is the type of context that is not being discussed. Everyone is blinded by the lurid details of allegations that have not been proven. Everyone's blinded by these lurid details, and no one is looking into the bigger picture.
Well, I called my friend, lives near Philadelphia. He said it's in the news every day. It's on TV every day. It's in the papers here. Just today's paper was another.
This is the only thing this paper does. I mean, what do they do other than this? It's like talk about some guy that went to a NASCAR race or something like that. It has no other reason for existing. It's not even printed in here in South Bend anymore.
No. But they still want the control.
So the only reason they can exist is being a willing servant of the oligarchs who are orchestrating this moral panic attacking the Catholic Church. That's the only justification they can find for their existence now.
But it seems like that's their mission in life, is to bring down institutions like the church. I mean, I don't know going back, but we were on the show one time back, 2006, because we did a show on Libido Dominandi, and your reputation is knowing the nuances of manipulating sexual desire and why they do it and where they're heading with it.
Yeah, I mean, as we said before, there is a problem in the Catholic Church, and the problem is homosexuality. But they can't say that's a problem because they think homosexuality is virtuous behavior. So what are they going to do? And so I'm saying that you have basically a kind of conniving going on here between the homosexual fifth column in the Catholic Church and the oligarchs, because both of them are interested in portraying this as pedophilia. Even the cases that they have, most of them are homosexual behavior. Most of them are homosexual behavior, some of it with teenagers, but is portrayed as pedophilia, which it is not. Okay? Why is that? Well, because pedophilia is a crime, so you can get the state involved now as an agent for your agenda. It also leads to very large political settlements. And it's safe, and it lets the homosexual fifth column in the Catholic Church off the hook, and they can do what they want with impunity now. And the best example, as we said before, is the Jesuits. And if you don't believe me, read America Magazine, which is basically the Catholic intelligentsia offering up incense to the idol of Americanism. Now, at this time, the same time that the story comes out in Philadelphia, the same time that they refused to print Carol Johnson's letter talking about the context here, St. Joseph University, which is my alma mater, unveils a statue of the two covenants, ecclesia and synagoga. Okay, now, the traditional iconography for synagoga on things like this, the facade of the cathedral in Strasbourg, is the blindfold. Okay, synagoga is blind. The Jews are blind because the day of their visitation came and they didn't recognize it. They didn't recognize Christ. Well, now we have a new type of iconography. We have two women. One is ecclesia, the church. She's wearing a crown. One is synagoga, the synagogue, and she's wearing a crown too. Well, what does the crown symbolize? They're both saved. Okay, they have both achieved the crown.
Well, that's Peter Gomes has a whole chapter on. Of course, the Jews are saved. They're saved by their, the covenant with God through the Torah, and
right.
he puts them completely on the same level of salvation.
So it's a monument to dual covenant theology. It was erected by St. Joseph University, which is a Jesuit institution. And what you see is here the Jesuits collaborating with the traditional enemies of the Catholic Church to basically ensure their control over the church. In other words, it's in the interest of the traditional enemies of the Catholic Church to promote a fifth column within the church. The homosexuals are always a fifth column. They are always going to be prone to double lives and being traitors. We know this from what happened to the Cambridge traitors during the 1930s. I've written about it in Degenerate Moderns, the whole chapter on homosexual as subversive, on Sir Anthony Blunt and the other traitors. It's their interest to promote this group of people as a traitor because this is the way they are allowed to control the Catholic Church. And so the intermediary here between the homosexual fifth column and the traditional enemies of the church has been Catholic-Jewish dialogue, okay, which basically cripples the church. We had a program here on the Jew taboo. We talked about the current Archbishop of Philadelphia, Archbishop Chaput, who gave a speech sponsored by First Things, where he found the villain finally, and it was secularizing radicals. These are the people who are responsible for homosexual marriage. Okay, that's completely clueless. If you go to, as we said before, if you go to Tikkun magazine, a Jewish magazine, Amy Dean wrote an article saying Jews were responsible for homosexual marriage. So what you see here is an elaborate kind of political alliance behind the scene to cripple the Catholic Church. And the worst part of it is that people, and I'd have to include our own Bishop Rhodes here, doesn't understand what's happening. Doesn't understand that this is warfare against the Catholic Church and the dishonesty of the attack.
Well, you have the two entities. There's that scripture that says, through covetousness, they will with feigned words make merchandise out of you. So you have the church representing the next life, the abandonment of this world for the next life. Then you have the Jewish people representing this life only and the pursuit of mammon, which
right.
fits into the American empire in a way.
Right, yes.
And so through covetousness, they will with feigned words. So it's deception is how they have to play it because their motivation is completely for mammon.
Yeah, in order, the oligarchs, the main barrier to the oligarchs getting their way is the moral law. And we've already talked about this. Why? What is the point? What is the Foucault's pact with the devil? You give us unlimited sexual liberation, and we won't criticize your economic system. That is the new left. That's the new left in a nutshell. So the left has completely been sidelined because of that. All they talk about is sexual issues, and as a result, the income disparity in the United States is increasing dramatically. Fewer and fewer people have more and more income. The biggest problem in the United States is low wages, but no one talks about wages anymore. Some people talk about jobs. Nobody talks about the fact that wages are terrible. Okay, and the people, but why? And so why? What is the motivation here? Well, if you're a homosexual, you don't have a family. So you don't need a family wage. You've got a lower wage, and you don't complain because you can go to the gay disco every evening.
Is this because the regular Marxism dealt with capitalism more directly, and now we're into cultural Marxism, which is the mayor's father was a Gramscian and it was cultural Marxism?
Yeah, the mayor's father, Joe Buttigieg, the professor at Notre Dame, is basically the editor of Antonio Gramsci's notebooks. That's all he's done. He hasn't written any books. He has an endowed chair. He's got, if you go to the library, there's one book, which is basically his dissertation on James Joyce and kind of stale modernist interpretation of James Joyce. But he's a genius at implementing Gramsci. I think that's where his genius is, and I think that's what the son learned from him. This cultural subversion, taking over the culture, the march through the culture, through the institutions, taking over institutions, and turning them into the opposite of what they claim to be. So Notre Dame is like the classic instance of what we're talking about. Taken over in the aftermath of Hesburgh's theft of the church, the Land O'Lakes statement, which happened 51 years ago. Okay, the church, Notre Dame, was powerless to basically offer any resistance to the regime. And so it became a completely docile vassal of the regime in everything they do. And so now people go there and they get the regime's version of Catholicism when you go there as a student. That's been the net result. That's what happened there. But we're saying this happened across the board because after World War II, the main villain, according to the oligarchs of that day, was the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church had to be taken out as a force in the United States.
Yeah, I was rereading my dad's class, Apologetics, taught by Father O'Brien. And it was, Notre Dame was a bastion against the empire. That's kind of how they saw themselves. But that reversed after World War II.
Largely through the efforts of Father O'Brien.
I know.
O'Brien, he may be rolling over.
Well, he
in his
didn't write the book.
Now.
My dad had his name on the book. It was some other professor that wrote the textbook, but O'Brien's name was on it. So I was confused because it wasn't really O'Brien's teaching, But before the war, Notre Dame saw itself as a bastion against. They used different words: communism, evolutionism. They used all kinds of words. But after the war, there was a shift.
No, I don't think so. I mean, they were part of the anti-communist crusade. They all got sucked into the anti-communist crusade, and that Father Peyton was taking money from the government as part of the anti-communist crusade. His Rosary Crusade was basically, part of the anti-communist crusade. The CIA was involved in all of these operations. But
it wasn't so strong in 1940 because the Soviet Union was one of our main allies.
Look, nothing stays the same. But the crucial turning point, Father O'Brien played a crucial role in this turning point because he appeared on a CBS documentary on birth control in the early 60s. And he made noises to the effect that the church might be open to changing her teaching on contraception. This got the eye of Cass Canfield, who was head of Planned Parenthood in New York City, and that initiated a contact from the Rockefellers, from the Population Council, through Cass Canfield to Hesburgh. George Schuster was the man who got it, and he basically negotiated the deal where Notre Dame would take Rockefeller money and hold secret conferences at Notre Dame to undermine the church's teaching on contraception.
Yeah, and
That's what they did. And what I'm saying here is basically homosexuality is the logical outcome of what Notre Dame started back with those contraception conferences. Because once you divorce procreation from the sexual act, there's no reason why a homosexual can't get married. Okay, and that was the trajectory, and it started at Notre Dame, and it, in many ways, reached its culmination there as well, with our gay mayor and his blasphemous parody of the sacrament of matrimony, which took place at the end of Gay Pride Week here.
But I also keep repeating, but O'Brien followed Zom, and he was the leader in teaching theistic evolution.
Which is part of Americanism.
Yeah.
Which was part of Americanism. And Notre Dame, they just had their 130th celebration of the consecration of the Basilica, Sacred Heart Basilica. And if you look at the people who attended, it was the who's who of the Americanist Catholic Church. John Ireland was there. It was the who's who of Catholic Americanism. And the only point here is that it has evolved over time to something that I'm sure these early people, to say to John Ireland, if you go to this, you'll end up with homosexuals marrying each other. He would have just,
No, but ideas have consequences, and a little bit of leaven's the whole lump.
So what we're seeing is this change over a period of time. Okay, but the change, this is what we're talking about today. The grand jury is only one more instance of the attack on the Catholic Church that began after World War II. It began. We've already talked about the destruction of Catholic neighborhoods. That's in Slaughter of Cities. We've talked about the destruction, the subversion of Catholic religious orders through people like Carl Rogers and sensitivity training that took place after Vatican II. That's in Libido Dominandi. We've talked about the deliberate Jewish subversion of the Second Vatican Council, the attempt to get Nostra Aetate to clear the Jews of the charge of deicide. That was Malachi Martin, the Jesuit, was involved in that, on taking money from the American Jewish Committee and B'nai B'rith. We know that happened. We know about the CIA's involvement in the Second Vatican Council through John Courtney Murray. John Courtney Murray working with Harry Luce and Time Life, which was the propaganda ministry for the CIA and for the American regime. John Courtney Murray trying to get the council to approve the separation of church and state, which is completely antithetical to what the church believes in that regard. All of these things were all elements of the psychological warfare campaign that has been conducted against the Catholic Church by the American regime almost from the day after World War II ended. Paul Blanchard's articles, which were collected in the book called American Freedom and Catholic Power, started appearing in The Nation, which is a socialist or Jewish magazine, depending on how you look at it, in 1947. That's 2 years after the war.
Well, that was David Wemhoff's main discovery, is that the CIA and the American government thought since we're the superpower, we can best establish our hegemony by infiltrating the Catholic Church, which is located in every city in the world, in a sense. And if we can infiltrate the Catholic mind, then our mind will be all around the world.
So what do? You get the Catholics to internalize the commands of their oppressors. And I'm sorry, but I think that's what Bishop Rhodes did. He was completely blinded by the lurid details, which did not lead to any indictment. Led to 2 indictments, but in the overwhelming majority of cases, 298 cases, did not lead to anything. They could not bring these cases to trial by their own admission. So if they can't believe it's credible, why should we believe it's credible? And if we can't believe it, why should Bishop Rhodes believe that it's credible? If they can't bring it to trial, why is it credible?
Well, I mean, Satan is the accuser of the brethren. So at a certain point, the bishop has to defend part of his job is to defend his flock from the false accusations of the enemy.
Yeah. Well, guess what? The Catholic Church doesn't have any enemies anymore. Everybody loves us. The Jews love us. They're not our enemies anymore. They're our friends. Except when it comes to Mr. Shapiro in Harrisburg or Miss Abraham in Philadelphia or down the line. I mean, one instance after another. Wait a minute. These Amy Dean and the promotion of homosexual marriage. The entire church, they got Robbie George got all these bishops to sign the Manhattan Declaration. And here's Amy Dean saying, we Jews beat them. We beat them. Read the article in Tikkun. She knows who her enemy is. Why doesn't Rhodes know who the enemy is?
Well, you have two. You got the moral law of God, then you have America's moral law, but established by the judges and the lawyers. Well, they're at war with each other. God's law.
There's only one moral law.
I know it, but the lawyers and the judges think they have it.
Well, that's been the problem in the United States from the beginning, because basically you have a country that's created overnight like that on July 4th, 1776. Like that, we're going to create everything new. And the question is, well, where does this law, what is its foundation? What is the foundation of this law? We the people. What is it? We the people? You mean everybody agreed with you? No, that wasn't true.
Whatever our consciousness happens.
What you saw over, I mean, Charles Beard is the guy who brought this out, but even at the beginning, you had a huge conflict between two groups of people over who was going to determine what the United States was going to be like. At that point, you called them creditors and debtors, and the debtors wanted paper money and easy credit, and the creditors wanted gold. And they wanted, tight money, and that was the creditors won. And these are the people that wrote the Constitution. And for the next 50 years, everybody's trying to pretend, all the creditors are trying to pretend that we the people did it. No, it wasn't that way. John Marshall's biography of George Washington, it's a complete con job. Basically, say the oligarchs, the Whig oligarchs of that day, basically created the government in their interest, and then they kept talking about we the people forever after. It's the same thing today. Who is we? There is no we here. We talked about this in the last program we did. We have a situation in South Bend where basically you have the homosexual takeover of the city of South Bend. That's what it is. And okay, that's terrible. But in order to understand it, you have to understand that Pete Buttigieg, our mayor, it is a tool of the oligarchs. That's why you go to Harvard. That's the difference between Joe Buttigieg's son and my son. My son flunked the test for the oligarchs, and Pete succeeded.
On evolution.
Evolution was the question that the Porcellian put to my son when they invited him to lunch, and he flunked. But I mean, but the bigger point here is that what are the homosexuals? They are the stooges of the oligarchs. They are the avant-garde that establishes oligarchic rule over conquered provinces like Indiana.
But even 10, 15 years ago, they had the Gay Pride Day at Notre Dame, and they gave out T-shirts, and you had over 1,000, I don't know what it was, 1,000, 2,000 students wearing the T-shirt, gay, fine by me. I mean, so their goal is to get everybody on their bandwagon.
Right. I said before, even if you're not a homosexual, you're supposed to act like a homosexual. And that means fundamentally, if you're in your formative years, trying to start a family, transient sterile relationships, which you can have as a heterosexual, thanks to contraception. That's the goal. Get yourself involved in transient sterile relationships, but above, one thing you don't want to do is ask for a raise. Don't complain about your crappy salary and the economic exploitation that you're being subjected to. Our illustrious mayor said the good jobs are not coming back. That's why we have gay disco lights downtown, to distract us from our miserable economic situation. And the fact of the matter is that the people of Indiana woke up to the situation in 2016. You were there. I was there when Donald Trump showed up in town, biggest crowd ever to assemble in South Bend, Indiana. And the people voted for Donald Trump because they were tired of oligarchic rule. This was just in the aftermath of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And the fact the CEOs parachuting into Indiana telling the legislators they had to overturn their laws because the CEO from San Francisco said so. This was, I don't know how can it be plainer to see what's going on? How can how can it be plainer to understand why we have a homosexual mayor? Okay, he is a representative of the oligarchs. This is the way that they impose oligarchic rule on what calls itself a democratic society.
But without knowing all this background, it's harder to discern what that grand jury is doing in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And you're never going to learn it by reading here. They go along. Their job as the local outlet for oligarchic propaganda is to go along with the story and give the local version of the moral panic and basically panic Bishop Rhodes into making some damaging admission or releasing. Why does he have to release these files? Why does he have to do that? Why?
To make the church look bad.
I'm sure Bishop Rhodes did not want to make the church look bad.
No, but he's being forced to.
He's panicking. This is clearly a panic reaction. He said so right here, okay? He had been thinking about it. This is the South Bend Tribune account, and I'm sure it's true because it appears in the South Bend Tribune. At a news conference on Friday afternoon, Rhodes said he's been wrestling for a year with the decision to release the priest names. He cited the Wednesday release of a Pennsylvania grand jury report which accuses 300 priests in Pennsylvania of abusing more than 1,000 children as the impetus for his decision to release all the names of accused priests here. Well, wait a minute. They're accused.
It goes back to 1930.
Wait a minute. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of priests. And I'm getting, so they're only accused. Oh, aren't you innocent until proven guilty? Why are you panicking here? Well, because there is this moral panic going on. I'm getting calls from people who are telling people from Harrisburg. And they're saying, I know this guy. Everybody here knows that these claims are false. Why are they being released? There was a woman, there's one of the priests who was accused by a woman. The woman has since recanted. The woman said she did it just to earn money. She recanted because they took her to trial, okay? She recanted. That allegation is in that report. Why is that still there? You mean to tell me that there's never been a case where a priest has been falsely accused? When you have huge financial incentives to accuse people, where the church is eager, willing, and able to throw every priest under a bus and make a huge financial settlement just to make it go away because they're intimidated by this type of action? You mean that doesn't influence people to bring false accusations? This is ridiculous. Why isn't someone saying this? Why isn't someone bringing up the Lynn Abraham, the debacle in Philadelphia that Lynn Abraham brought about? A priest dying in prison after he was falsely accused. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that, Father.
Well, it used to be that a bishop's main criteria was probably willingness to be martyred. In other words, no matter what the pressure, if it meant death, he would hold the line. But it doesn't seem... I'm sure if you put it in those terms that Bishop Rhodes would be willing to be martyred. I'm saying the fact that he's acting this way is an indication that he clearly does not understand the situation. He does not understand psychological warfare. He does not understand how psychological warfare has been used for my entire lifetime as a weapon to destroy the Catholic Church in the United States of America. But I don't believe that's an excuse, though. just because he doesn't understand it. You know, he has a duty to understand it.
I am not saying he will have to stand before God and answer what he did, and maybe God will say you were culpable even in spite of your ignorance. This doesn't release you from culpability. It's something you should have known.
St. Peter describes it as willfully ignorant.
Look, I have been down this road myself. Okay, I have been the messenger who brings the bad news. Okay, in 1987, the head of the liturgy program at Notre Dame University was found shot to death in the basement of his house 2 blocks from where I live. I then did an investigation, published an article. He was a Dominican priest from Denmark. He said in his will that he didn't want to have any funeral. He had apparently abandoned the Catholic faith and completely handed him over to himself to homosexual behavior. He was found surrounded in his basement with whips and chains, homosexual pornography, and automatic weapons, one of which killed him. Okay, there are people who were talking to me at the time saying that he was murdered. This happens all the time. Homosexuals have a very high rate of murdering each other. Okay, it might have been the case here, but the investigation was shut down because Notre Dame University leaned on the police department here. I went to ask for the dossier, and the Sergeant Trineri calls up the Notre Dame theology department and says, I have E. Michael Jones here. Should I give him the dossier? Well, guess what they said? No. So that was the end of that. You know, so we have Notre Dame colluding here with the suppression of the story. I go to the funeral. There's a bomb threat. Some homosexual or somebody or other threatened to blow up the Sacred Heart Cathedral. We all had to leave the church because of a bomb threat. Okay, I wrote the article. I go to a conference. I hand it to Cardinal Law of Boston. He comes down the next day and says to me, what good does this serve? All you're doing is airing the church's dirty laundry. That was 30 years ago that I did that. Cardinal Law had to go into exile because of the moral panic the Boston Globe created in Boston. He died in exile in Rome because he didn't want to be taken before a judge here in the United States. Nobody's learned anything.
But he was willfully ignorant. He had the chance to grow in that knowledge. I don't want to know. He suppressed it.
This is like the classic American story. Daisy Miller, you know, the innocent young American who's walking around with a gigolo in Rome, and Mrs. Winterbourne pulls up in her carriage, says, get in the carriage, you're making a fool out of yourself. And Daisy Miller says, I don't think I want to know what you mean. So we have the church here. I mean, is that what Cardinal Law said to me? Probably is. I don't think I want to know what you mean.
Sure.
So it's not as if I'm some Pollyanna guy who doesn't know anything about the sexual corruption in the Catholic Church. I know a lot about it, and I spent 30 years banging my head against the wall trying to get people like Cardinal Law to listen to me. Well, was demonized for trying to do that.
Well, you're like Nathan went to David, and Nathan gave the story to David, and David could have said, well, I don't know what you mean.
David could have said, I don't think I want to know what you mean.
Yeah.
And he would not be a saint because of that, because he committed a sin, and when the sin was exposed to him, he repented.
But it was exposed not totally directly, but the exposure was there. So in other words, just because you didn't lay it out, boom, boom, boom.
I did lay it out, boom, boom, boom.
And
That's what the article was.
And he still rejected.
This is not me just, I had chapter and verse in that article. There's no way to get away from what I did in that article. I tried the same thing with Bishop Darcy. You know, their dead baby shows up in a trash can at St. Mary's College around the same time. I write the article, I give it to Bishop Darcy. He calls a meeting and he says to me, what's your problem? Oh, wait a minute, Your Excellency. This isn't about me. This is about the baby in the trash can. And no, this is about you, buddy, because you're just a malcontent. So I've been doing this for over 30 years now, and so I'm no stranger to this thing, but this is not that. I'm sorry, but the grand jury is a totally bogus operation, and it's war, it's jihad against the Catholic Church. That's all it is. Period.
Well, they're posing as investigative journalists. I mean, they want to
What
still
did they
claim.
investigate?
There is-
Nothing.
No, it's.
I am the investigative journalist. I did the investigation. I've been blacklisted from the South Bend Tribune. They're worthless.
Yeah, because they're not investigating anything of
They're not
significance.
investigating anything. They're just taking the ball and running with it. Is there some? And so now, what's Rhodes going to do? He's going to release the names of priests who have been accused. Well, why? Wait a minute. Accused is not the same as convicted. Don't we know this? So why are you issuing the names of people who now cannot or will not be able to clear themselves in the court of public opinion? Your reputation is over now.
I mean, the two highest saints are theologically are Jesus and St. Paul. They're always in court under false accusations. Paul would say, but you can't prove the charges.
And who brought these false accusations against Paul?
Well, the Jews always did.
Who brought the false accusations against Jesus Christ?
The Jews did.
Well, this is the gist of my book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. These people turned on Logos at the foot of the cross, and they've been social revolutionaries ever since. And the cutting edge of social revolution in the United States right now is homosexuality, homosexual marriage. Ask Amy Dean. Don't ask me. Ask Amy Dean.
But based on your wisdom, and I've asked this question before, but it's still always a pertinent question. Based on your wisdom coming out of Libido Dominandi, they know that if they can succeed in this revolution on the homosexual issue, the church is what's going to happen. If they win, what's it going to do to the church? What is it doing?
Well,
what are they hoping?
That the church will go along with the next war in the Middle East. Isn't that it? Isn't that the point? We brought this up at the beginning. That's always been the point here. That was the point. That's what the Iraq War was all about. That's what's going on here. We're back to square one. We're back to what we started at the beginning. Why has anything changed? Nothing has changed. The church is the guardian of the moral order. The church is the bulwark for the defense of international law. The church needs to step forward and defend international law, specifically with regard to Iran, and make clear to the world that there are only three reasons. There are three reasons why the United States does not have a nuclear agreement with Iran. Sheldon Adelson, Paul Singer, and Bernard Marcus. Three rich Jews control our foreign policy. And all of this theater, this political theater, this grand jury political theater is there to cripple the Catholic Church as the only opponent to what Israel is doing in the Middle East.
Well, yeah, we started out thinking that maybe that was possible, but now you're saying it's more than possible that that's what's happening. So this is Peter Helland on the show Israel and Dr. E. Michael Jones, and I'm sure you're going to keep abreast on this, and people may want you to come back. So, till next time.